Josh.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the July 21st, 2020 Human Research Protection Program Research Matters. My name is Josh Rafido and I'm excited to welcome all of you here today. I'm going to be doing just a couple of quick announcements and then I'll be turning it over to our presenter for today. So the first thing just to for everybody to know is that we will be sharing the presentation from today as soon as we're able to after this meeting. If you need an attendance certificate, that will be limited to those who signed into this meeting with an email address. You can sign in and be anonymous, and unfortunately we can't send certificates to anybody who signed in as an anonymous attendee. The other quick thing that we just wanted to let everybody know is that the HRPP does have 3 current job postings available. Those job postings include a regulatory assistant, a senior regulatory associate, and a regulatory monitoring analyst. All 3 of those jobs are live and posted on the external website. So if you're interested or you have any questions, please apply or send an email to somebody here in the HRPP. And then the last quick announcement that we wanted to make is that the some of the consent templates, including the main consent template, the repository consent templates, and for sure the short form consent template was updated. In the footer of those consent templates, there was some language, do not disclose. And that language has now been removed from the footer. That was producing some problems with some of the medical records departments that were helping to file those. We're not really sure what the regulatory basis for that wording was, and there's separate laws that really govern when information can be released from the medical records. There will be a listserv announcement that will be coming out that will detail some of that so that you have some official documentation regarding why the wording has been removed from the templates. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter. I'm pleased to have Eriko Iwatate here today. She's going to be talking about the Human Research Protection Program's support for clinicaltrials.gov. So without any further ado, here is Eriko.
Thank you, Josh. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about clinicaltrial.gov or ct.gov. So I'm going to give a basic high-level overview of ct.gov so that we are all on the same page. So here's the outline. So by the end of this presentation, my goal for each one of you to be able to tell what ct.gov is, why it is required, which trial needs to be registered by when and how, and who will be required to do it. Lastly, I will talk briefly about ct.gov program and how we can assist investigators be compliant with the federal regulations. So I want to begin with this. 2019-2020 is a milestone year in human history because of the COVID. So we don't need to be a historian to know that we are living in historic times. So now we may be facing other types of pandemic, non-compliance pandemic. So per federal regulations, investigators are required to register applicable clinical trial and result reported on ct.gov. But historically, investigators are not doing a good job being in non-compliant. So this is a huge problem more than ever, especially of the era of COVID, and entire world are currently being challenged to somehow live with this highly infectious, deadly virus. So this morning, when I checked the ct.gov website, 2,700 COVID-related trials are registered. 1,500 were COVID-related clinical trial, and 215 trials have been marked as a completed. So among 215 trials, only 1 trial reported the result on ct.gov, only 1. So Deborah Zareen, former director of CT.gov at NIH for last 13 years, she recently resigned. So she came into our meeting in May, and she said how important it is to ensure COVID trial results are timely reported on CT.gov for scientific scrutiny and urgent decision making. Dr. Zareen asked us, do we need the result of COVID trial available to the public 1 to 3 years after the trial and after the journal publication, or do we need the result now? I think we all know the answer to that, right? I mean, who needs to know the result of the COVID trial in July 2024 while COVID mortality cases are just rising? So we need the COVID trial results right now so the physician can potentially save people with COVID. So these are also applies to, all clinical trial, not just for the COVID trial. So Dr. Zareen also expressed her concern with us that there are probably more trial out there, but have not been registered on the CT.gov yet. So they're in non-compliance. So her comment was well supported by several studies, and this Lancet article published early this year was the first comprehensive study of compliance since new US regulation came into effect in January 2017. So that is the final rule 42 CFR 11. So according to this article, less than half, so 41% of clinical trial results are reported on time to CT.gov. And 1 in 3 trials are unreported ever. So this study also used the prediction model to predict the trial with non-industry sponsors, such as government, hospital, and university, like UT Southwestern, are far more likely to not follow the federal requirement than trial sponsored by the industry. So industry sponsors are doing much better in terms of registration and result reporting on time. So I don't know about quality of data because in this article they don't discuss, but as far as registration and result reporting go, they're more compliant than university. So non-compliance, so what? Why do we even fuss about? So many of you are already aware that there are financial penalties for non-compliance. So US government could impose $12,103 per day per trial for any non-compliance. So this is pretty drastic fines and pretty good reason why we want to stay in compliant. So there are multiple watchdog with CT.gov compliance. So Public FDA Amendment Act non-compliance trial tracker website, so run by people in UK. So it automatically takes data from CT.gov to find the trial that have missed the reporting deadline. It also calculates how much each institution owe US government. So it also lists the name of the trial, name of the responsible party. So I encourage each one of you to visit this website and type UT Southwestern and just make sure that trial that you're responsible for are not in danger of being late because you really don't want your trial to be listed on this public website. So as you can see in the red box on the right, the government has not yet enforced the penalty yet, but it doesn't mean they won't forever. So there has been a lot of attention and more social political pressure on the federal government to start collecting these fines. So in fact, I recently spoke with folks at Johns Hopkins. They said Johns Hopkins was actually given 30 days by FDA to update one of their trial. So it seems government are finally started collecting these fines. So this is a real phenomena, just like COVID. So this is not fake news, not the hoax. So PI may need to fine today, but again, this is public available data. UT Southwestern leadership are also well aware of this website. So, and you just never know who else is going to use this public information to make a point. So there are more watchdogs. So BMJ and other journals are highlighting non-compliant trial monthly on their webpage to help investigators compliant with the federal regulation. So we certainly don't want our PI trial to be highlighted and ultimately hurt the UT Southwestern's reputation. So these two are a watchdog for the late trial reporting, and they're also watchdog for the quality of data on the ct.gov. So NIH is monitoring each organization and university's performance using their own success metrics. So their very recent analysis, which was shared to the task force member last month, 70 high volume non-industry organization university with 15 or more ct.gov results during January 2019 to May 2020 were included. So here you can see top 28 university and bottom 27 universities. So UT Southwestern, in fact, was also included in their analysis, but it's a private information, so org ID is being assigned, so we don't know where UT Southwestern rank. But median of cumulative percent success for 70 universities were 60.1%. So NIH Director Francis Collins and his group are pretty upset with academic institutions have not improved in this regard. So there are more watchdog for the quality of the ct.gov record, even after investigator did the result reporting and published the manuscript. So this group we have to watch out because they're basically looking at the discrepancy between data on ct.gov and published data. So please note that whatever you put for primary outcome during registration on the ct.gov, you will be held with that standard at the time of publication. So when this group finds discrepancy or evidence of primary outcome switching, so basically outcome switching is you change the primary outcome on the ct.gov after study is completed. So that is considered publication bias and known as a multiple testing issue. So this group will write a letter to the journal editor and request for the article correction and retraction. So the point here is that people are watching. In fact, ct.gov website receives about 150,000 unique visitors daily. So we need to do the reporting on time and do it right, since important people may be looking at your record. So now let's talk about what ct.gov is. So ct.gov is a clinical trial registry and result database run by National Library of Medicine at NIH. So there are two interfaces. One is the public interface on the top. So anyone can look it up, the trial, for any reason. The other interface is a protocol registration and result reporting system, PRS, so which requires university-specified login. And so this is where responsible party, PI, register and post the result. So this is very much like ERB system and whatever happened in the back end. So UT Southwestern has over 700 studies registered, over 130 results being posted. So primary purpose is to publicly disclose about trial to general public. Basic three functions are investigator to register their trial, update the trial, and report the results of the trial. Now I want to talk about why this is necessary. So first, we have an ethical obligation to the participants. So those enrolled in a trial have the belief, trust, hope that their participation will help advance the medical science. I just want you to think about phase 1 pediatric oncology study. I mean, don't we owe results of the trial to the parents of a child who participate in the study? Even the trial results are negative, not what they expected, or study was terminated, whatever reason. If investigators obtain data from these children, investigators truly owe them some result. ct.gov is the place to return the favor to participants and their family member. And of course, trial results is in Declaration of Helsinki. So next is the concept of evidence-based medicine. So all clinical trial needs to be transparent. So ct.gov is a place for investigators to be transparent with their trial, because you get to share protocol, consent form, statistical analysis plan, data code, and results. So we do that because we know that the trial needs to have a high scientific internal, external validity. Trials should be able to be replicated. The reporting of the results should not be just cherry picked. And we all know that all guidance and clinical decisions should be based on the evidence, and not because someone said, you should try it out and see what happened, right? So trial registration is required because it is a law, as I mentioned. So on January 18, 2017, the final rule of FDA Amendment Act, FEDA, came into effect. The law requires university and other organizations to register and post the result of applicable clinical trial. And revised common rule also requires approved informed consent form has been used to consent participants to be posted on ct.gov for just for the federally funded study. Also, ICF must include ct.gov statement for FDA regulated clinical trial. So next is the publication, and this is a big one. So if you want to publish the study, you need to register. So most top journals like New England Journal of Medicine, BMJ, JAMA, and Lancet, over 1,000 journals agree to follow the National Committee of Medical Journal Editor, ICMJE policy. So ICMJE is now also requiring investigators to include individual participant data sharing plan on the ct.gov at the time of registration as for the condition for publication. And ct.gov is an information resource to patient, physician, researcher, grant agency, policymakers. And there are many other reasons. So the big one being CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Service. So if your trial is going to claim some of the procedure to be billed to Medicare or Medicaid, CMS needs to have an NCT number. That's the National Clinical Trial Identification Number. So just like a STU number in ERB, when investigators submit the claims. Also, NIH also require all NIH-funded clinical trial to be registered and result reported. So as you can see, there are just so many reasons why ct.gov registration is required. So now let's talk about which studies need to be registered and result reported. So first things first, regulation policy requires clinical trial to be registered on ct.gov. You can put observational epidemiological study if you want to, but it is not required for the most of the part. So there are similar definition of clinical trial out there. So I'm listing one from NIH, FDA, and ICMJE here. So the key here is that in order to be classified as a clinical trial, in general, trials must be a prospective cohort study with a prospective assignment of intervention. So that includes only single arm or control placebo arm. So just to give you some examples, so this is NIH clinical trial definition. So in general, if you answer yes to all of the following 4 questions, then it is a clinical trial. Therefore, registration may be required. So traditionally, when you think about clinical trial, we think about randomized drug device trial, right? But NIH definition of clinical trial, as you can see, is much broader than that. So clinical trial could include pilot study and behavior intervention. For example, if investigator wants to assess telework, working remotely will decrease the blood pressure at a day among healthy worker. That is actually clinical trial per NIH definition. It also includes mechanistic trial. So those are the early translational studies. Say you give a metformin to everyone, and assess insulin sensitivity, something like that. So that is considered clinical trial per NIH definition. And also by this definition, most of the chart review, retrospective chart review, are actually not considered clinical trial, therefore does not need to be registered. However, there's an important exception. So pediatric post-market surveillance of device products, which typically done in retrospective fashion or observational fashion, are considered registration required study under FDA. So some of you reach out to me about retrospective chart review study. That will be depends. It is study specific. If chart review is done as part of pediatric post-market surveillance of device product, then yes, registration and results are actually required. So just keep in mind. So once you determine that the study is clinical trial, then in general, a clinical trial needs to be registered if the PI is IND IDE holder, or if it meets the definition of FDA's applicable clinical trial, if your trial is funded by NIH in whole or in part, otherwise if required by funding agency. So PI needs to read terms and conditions of their contract. Or if trial involves procedure, claims to Medicare and Medicaid, or if required by the journal for publication, as mentioned. So for the results, poster required if it meets the followings on the right. So important thing to remember here is that one trial, one ct.gov record. So multi-site trial are not registered by individual sites. So if this is a multi-site study, it must be registered only once. And in general, IND and IDE holder or main site PI or industry sponsor will be responsible party to register the trial on ct.gov. So your PI must coordinate with all the collaborator and sponsor before registering trial on the ct.gov to avoid the duplicate. And say PI is unsure about whether study meets the definition of a clinical trial. So we generally recommend to register anyway, as there's no really significant downside of registration. So this flowchart summarizes what I just said. So this flowchart will be available to research community. So please go through this with the PI and determine registration results reporting are required or not. So here's another reference highlighting the key reporting requirements mandated by various federal law and regulation and publication policy. So this is for your reference, and I did not include on this table, but DOD, VA, PCORI, Patient Centered Outcome Research Institute, they also require registration and results reported. So just please keep in mind. So now, what is the timeline for registration and results reporting? So as you can see, most of the agencies are requiring trial registration on ct.gov within 21 days of first participants enrollment. So the critical distinction is that for publication in the ICMJ e-journal, the trial needs to be registered before enrollment of the first participant. Otherwise, investigator cannot publish in journal. So we have received email from UT Southwestern investigator asking why their manuscript was rejected. Even they were following timeline, which is 21 days of enrollment per federal regulation and NIH policy, and PI did the result posting on time. That's because they did not register the trial before the first participants enrollment. Their manuscript was rejected. It did not even go to peer review. So this is the email investigator received from editor at New England Journal of Medicine in response to a manuscript submission. So, I mean, this is true tragedy for PI who spent years to receive the grant, years to complete the trial, spend a lot of time to analyze data, write up the manuscript, and not being able to publish their life work on some of the best journal. So we do not want this to happen to our investigators. So this is something PI needs to be made aware of if they have not already. So for this reason and many other reasons, at UT Southwestern, CT.gov trial must be registered at the time of EIRB study submission. We want to ensure that registration is done prior to participant enrollment. So this is a timeline for result reporting. Results posting must be done within 12 months of primary completion date. So CT.gov has their own unique terminology, so we all have to learn and get used to them. So primary completion date is the last day of the data collection of the last participant for the purpose of primary outcome. So investigators often get confused. I get confused at first too. So primary completion date is not the date of the study completion or data analysis completion or journal publication, none of that. So again, it is the last day of the data collection for the pre-specified primary outcome in the IRB approved protocol. So that's when 12 months clock starts for the deadline for the result reporting. So here's the consequences for late registration or result posting. So this include, as I mentioned, $12,103 per day per trial. And another big one is NIH. So not only our PI loses NIH funding, as I mentioned earlier, per NIH Director Francis Collins, notice of their grant awards on the clinical trial will be held up if previously funded records have issued. So NIH is now checking the CT.gov record for the previously funded trial. So if you have an outstanding trial with major issue comments, or trial is flagged, I suggest your PI to get on it immediately. And consequences at UT Southwestern includes, so SPOT will be holding coverage analysis finalization, and we will be holding EIRB study activation. So for new study, we'll hold the green light. So your EIRB study may be approved by the IRB full board, but your trial will not be activated until PI complete the CT.gov registration and put NCT number in below, which transfer to EIRB. So, so without the proof of registration, and you can't start the study. So here are important things to remember. So next few slides are the most important slide. So I appreciate your attention. So according to Deborah Zareen, again, former director of CT.gov, so CT.gov registration and result posting are somewhat scientific tasks rather than administrative tasks, requiring basic statistical and epidemiological knowledge, especially for the result reporting. So you need to know the study design, assignment of intervention. You need to be comfortable, very comfortable with reporting descriptive statistics and dispersion method for the outcome. So according to NIH, registration can take up to 10 hours of your time to complete it. So CT.gov PRS review cycle may take up to 7 days. And also please keep in mind that CT.gov reviewers' major comments must be addressed within 15 calendar days. So it's a calendar days, so that includes Saturday and Sunday. So this is actually per federal regulation for the applicable clinical trial. So our recommendation for registration is to initiate prior to EIRB submission. We also recommend PI COI to do the registration, especially for the complex module, such as outcome measure module and arms and intervention module, where we often get major issue comments back from CT.gov reviewers. So for example, outcome measure module is asking about primary outcome and secondary outcomes. So you may think it's easy, right? So you should be able to find this information in the protocol or manuscript, right? But that's not the case for the most of the time. So ct.gov is asking detailed and very specific description of how this outcome measure is being assessed and quantified. And you need to know if you're reporting in ratio, count, mean change. If you're using scoring scale to measure the outcome, you must also include possible score range, meaning of the high-low score, and the time frame. So for this reason, why we recommend PI COI to do this section. It is very important to do the ct.gov registration correctly because that will make result reporting so much easier and save some time. So it may only take 30 minutes for PI to do this section because it's PI study, PI knows about it. Whereas coordinator may take 10 hours because simply coordinator does not have sufficient information to do the data entry. So, but we understand PIs are extremely busy with the other responsibilities. So PI may delegate the task to the suitable personnel on the study team, in which case the PI as a responsible party must give assurance of scientific validity, and PI still need to log into the system, approve and submit the trial to the ct.gov. Because ct.gov allows only responsible party to submit the trial to the ct.gov. And expectation is PI to be responsible party. So for the result per NIH, it can take up to 50 hours. Of course, this will all depend on the complexity of the trial. Multinational, multi-arm trial with multiple primary and secondary outcome with large sample size can take much longer than single size, single arm pilot trial with small sample size, right? So ct.gov review cycle for results can take up to 30 days, and investigator must address ct.gov reviewers' comment within 25 calendar days. Again, this is per regulation. So task force recommends PI to start entering results 3 to 4 months before the due date. Again, results are due within the 12 months of primary completion date. So they have a whole year to do it. So I highly recommend PI and maybe even with the help of biostatistician to do the results section. Because now you need to summarize the raw data, derive outcome measure, choose the appropriate unit of measure type such as mean, median, and associated precision dispersion methods such as you could choose standard deviation, standard error, and so on for the outcome. So keep in mind that it is really up to PI and study team to decide what data to be entered for pre-specified outcome. So whatever PI wants. So it is not, my place to tell what data needs to be entered. And what I have seen is that PI will drop off the table 1 of the manuscript to the coordinator to do the result reporting. But again, table 1 may not contain all the required information for the coordinator to do the results section. So again, PI needs to do it. Also to remember, ct.gov is not asking for the results of statistical test or the manuscript. You can report if you want to, but statistical test results are optional. So what ct.gov is asking in the results section is simply the aggregated summary results of the primary outcome for the initial results reporting. And once investigator is done correcting data for the secondary outcome, then report the secondary outcome and adverse events. So for example, if protocol pre-specified primary outcome is 5-year survival of say cancer chemotherapy, all you have to report is participants flow, like the consort flow diagram, some of you may be aware, and baseline characteristics, age, gender of the participants, and number of participants who survived for 5 years in each arm. So these data should be available when the last subject reaches the endpoint. So with this example, 5 years from the last participant started the chemotherapy. So you do not need to report whether these numbers reported arms are statistically different. You also don't need to report like a hazard ratio, risk ratio, whatever measure of association, odds ratio. you may be eventually reporting them in your manuscript for the main analysis, you do not need to report those on ct.gov. And keep in mind that long-term follow-up data are typically not required in the results section of ct.gov unless they are pre-specified primary outcome or secondary outcome in the IRB approved protocol. But I think that is very rare. And say your study is terminated or halted for whatever reason, if you enroll participants, even one participant, and obtain any data, even just the demographics, you are obligated to report those data on ct.gov. So please also keep in mind that once you register the trial, you cannot delete or withdraw the trial unless there's a special reason, say there's a duplicate records or you did not enroll anyone at all. So just like EIRB, registration of the trial is not the end of the story for the investigators. So ct.gov registry require annual updates, just like continuing review CR in EIRB. And when protocol amendments are being made, so just like a modification, investigators have to update the record in ct.gov. And these are timeline for specific data elements. So ct.gov is definitely not, set and forget kind of thing. So this slide will help you and your PI to understand the timing of ct.gov reporting responsibility. So this is from the perspective of the study team. So I want to emphasize that both are almost exactly in parallel. So you submit, register the study, but just using different systems. Investigators submit modification, update the ct.gov record, do the CR in ERB, and do the annual update in ct.gov. So only difference between EIRB and ct.gov is that investigator must submit the results in ct.gov if it is required. So operationally, this means that every time you do CR, modification, or submit notice of study closure in EIRB, that can trigger your corresponding action in the ct.gov. So now let's talk about how. So once you determine that your trial needs to be registered using the flowchart, so the first thing is to determine who is going to be the owner of the record. Could be PI, coordinator, research manager, department PRS administrator, but please keep in mind that whoever creates the record become record owner, and record owner will be the one receiving notification from ct.gov. Then decide the responsible party. Again, expectation is PI to be responsible party. So in order to be listed, PI to be responsible party, PI must have a PRS user account. So please email me if you or your PI do not have a PRS user account. Then log into the PRS system. Record owner create the record, enter study information, and PI approve and release the record to ct.gov. Then ct.gov reviews, they may have a requested changes, so you must address major comments within 15 calendar days. Then the record gets approved, meaning the record is now available to the public. Then the responsible party makes sure to keep the record up to date, do the annual update. And once you complete the data collection for primary outcome, PI will add the results, but only if required. Then follow the same review process as a registration for result posting. So this is pretty brief. So our hope is to give a talk on how to do the registration and results posting separately in the near future. So please stay tuned for that. So lastly, I want to talk briefly about ct.gov program and how we can assist investigators be compliant with the federal regulations. So we continue to make improvement with the ct.gov program. So we offer training, provide regulatory guidance. We help investigators with determination of study, whether study registration are required or not. We assist with PRS navigation, assist with the registration, create user account, assist with annual updates and the results. So once we clean the old problem records, we'll start sending the reminder email for the result reporting annual updates. So, and if you have any question, please let me know. And so please keep in mind that, so there's a difference between self-service and full service. So our institution, at least for now, is a self-service. So study team and ultimately PI is responsible for summarizing the raw data, deriving outcome measure, data entry, and submitting it to the ct.gov. So I'm happy to assist you administratively, but not scientifically, because science is the responsibility of study team. So those of you who have heard from me by email and those of you who have not heard from me. So basically we have a communication process. So if record needs attention, I first contact PI, record owner, CC access list member. So if I don't hear back, then I add on program manager, department PRS manager, then IRB director, department chair, and dean will be add on. So, so far I have not had to go to stage number 4, but this is our communication process for ct.gov reporting reminder. So here are the take-home message and homework. So first, if you don't have a PRS user account, I can create one for you. So we do not allow account sharing. So please send following information to ct.gov email. So we encourage everyone to have a PRS user account, whether or not your trial requires ct.gov registration. Again, PI for the trial must have a PRS user account. Second, so make PI the responsible party for the existing study record. So again, expectation is PI to be responsible party to approve and release the record to the ct.gov. So in order to pull PI's name here, PI has to have a PRS user account, as I mentioned. So, and add other research staff who will be assisting PI with data entry on the access list. So record owner of the trial, department PRS administrator, and I can add research staff in access list to assist the PI. And so the next one is please mark your calendar for the results posting and annual update. The response expected date for the PRS major issue comments too. So when you receive the PRS reviewer's major comment, it will flag your record like this image, and it tells you the correction expected day. So remember, 15 calendar days for registration and 25 calendar days for result posting to address the PRS major issue comment. So you want to put those dates on your calendar as well. So if you don't meet those due date, your record will be flagged on the system and showing up on the problem record list, and you'll probably hear from me. And eventually will be on the public FEDA non-compliance tracker website. So you basically become in non-compliance status, and responsible party will be responsible for the fines when government impose and responsible for other consequences. So we have many old trial with unaddressed major issue comments. So you got to take care of them. Again, you know, you can't delete the record. So please work with PI to get major comments resolve ASAP. And then I'm happy to help as much as I can. So because more days pass, data may not be available. And it is simply hurting universities' compliance as a whole, as you saw in NIH's percent success metric report. And so please do not falsely postponing primary completion date so that you can somehow delay the result reporting. So I don't want to point the fingers to anyone, but it has happened. And it really doesn't help because those primary completion date, we will be verifying the dates on the VILO and ERB record. So you just got to do it and then done with it. And please review flowchart to determine whether the trial require registration and result reporting. Again, we'll be sending this flowchart to the community after this talk. And lastly, please review selected resource on the next slide, which can get you up to the speed. And please ask if you have any questions. And here are the list of resources. And so this is my last slide. So if you have any question, please let us know. Here are the list of contact person for CT.gov related issues. Again, it is a lot, but once we get hands of navigating PRS system and do a couple of data entry with the help of PI, it will become easy so we can stay in compliant. So if you could pass this information, so this slide to your study team and PI, that would be great. And email me if you have any question. So this is my last slide, I believe. Thank you so much for listening. Do you have any question? Can you hear me?
Thank you, Eriko, so much for that. Let's give just a couple of minutes to see if there are any other questions that are coming through. Well, at this time, I do not see any additional questions. So thank you again, Eriko, for that very informative presentation. It will be sent out via the listserv shortly after this. If you do have any questions, you can send an email to that CT.gov email address. And thank you again. Hope you all have a great afternoon.